Hello everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I'm going to be briefly discussing the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think this is a rather famous work and one that has been thoroughly recognized over the years. And C.S. Lewis, the author, is one of the more famous authors of his day, and also was a good I guess you could say, quasi-acquaintance J.R. Tolkien, who did Lord of the Rings. Now, again, although both these men have sort of similar styles, and the fact that they chose to kind of take a somewhat, I guess you could say, quasi-religious narrative, although I think Lord of the Rings is a little less obvious. It addresses those kinds of concepts. C.S. Lewis is probably also one that ingrains those concepts as well, but I think they're a little bit more obvious. And also, I think Tolkien is far superior as far as creating a fantasy world, as far as really absorbing the details and really putting in a thorough history. Whereas C.S. Lewis, I think, was largely influenced by children. This book does feel very childlike in its construction and how it operates, which is kind of the reason, I guess, why you could say it's not really fully fleshed out. It doesn't have a whole lot of depth to it. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a perfect example of this kind of approach. And I think this leads to kind of some problems that I think he runs into as far as really creating the world. And as far as imaginativeness and all of that, I feel like that it's not as powerful or not as interesting, not as intriguing, at least to me, than something like The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or something like that. But regardless, this is actually the second book within the sort of Chronicles of Narnia series, which is very odd because I almost don't really understand what could really be involved within the first book, since I haven't read all of the books actually, and I've only really stopped with this one because I think it didn't really spark my interest to really continue, unfortunately. But without further ado, let me give you a little bit of a summary, and then I'll kind of summarize my thoughts onto it, as why I'm a little bit more cynical about this book, and this whole kind of fantasy setup that C.S. Lewis tries to create. So basically, there are 4 siblings named Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy. Lucy, I think, being the youngest, Peter being the oldest. Again, sort of going in sequential order here. And they ultimately have to leave the country, or leave for the country, technically, of England during World War II. As a result, they end up going to this one particular location where they are taken care of, and basically Lucy in particular is the one who discovers the wardrobe, and this wardrobe ultimately leads to Narnia, this completely fantasized world where there is a clear established villain, the White Witch, and then you have also innocent protagonist characters like Mr. Tumnus, and also eventually Aslan, and eventually her other siblings enter the world, but obviously they're very skeptical at first, and they sort of kind of come and band together to sort of save the day from the White Witch, or basically who basically runs the entire Narnia world, and in doing so, she kind of makes a endless winter, so to speak. Excuse me. In other words, kind of like Elsa and Frozen. But the thing about this whole setup and a lot of the Christian symbolism, you can clearly tell. You'll see how one of the siblings is sort of influenced by the evil side, and it's very black and white. It's very clear, linings as to who's the bad gal in this case and who are the good people. And you obviously get a lot of the kinds of things that you expect out of that kind of a setup and that kind of Christian sort of literature. They even reference the fact that the Narnia world doesn't have Christmas as a result of the White Witch. So it's just kind of a sort of, really trying to really shove in that kind of idea that, yes, this is sort of this somehow sort of relates to Christianity, somehow, this fictitious world. But at the same time, I don't feel this is really that preachy. I mean, obviously, there's been other works that do come off as a lot more preachy than this, but I felt kind of taken aback by the amount of kind of preachiness that sort of existed within this book. I mean, it's not extensive, and it doesn't, and again, C.S. Lewis doesn't try to beat a dead horse, but at the same time, I still feel like I've seen these similar kinds of morals and these similar black and white scenarios within other works, that I don't find it as inspiring. And I think the whole fantasy thing that he sets up, it doesn't feel as there just doesn't seem a whole lot of depth or a whole lot of investment into the whole world. What does it? You can go through a wardrobe, and you can only go through, I guess, at certain points, where the world will actually exist, and then it won't. It just feels so. Again, it feels very childlike. It doesn't feel like it's fully fleshed out, these ideas. It feels like that a lot of these ideas are just they're simple. They're not they're not as interesting, in my opinion. Like, I mean, I don't find it interesting that, you go through a door and suddenly there's this whole other world of existence. I think there have been a lot more elaborate ways into which people have kind of introduced a new world or introduced, new ideas and concepts of a fictitious world than in this one, to be honest. And I honestly too find the naivete and also the kind of unnecessary rudeness of one of the kids to be kind of just bizarre, and it kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense as to why he kind of is the way he is. So it's just one of those tales that I see the effort and the genuineness of the values that C.S. Lewis is trying to get across, but I just think that there's been better ways of addressing this, and a lot more interesting ways of addressing it, and a lot more in-depth ways than really anything that happens within the story. And I just think that that there have been, I think, children's stories that have really been a little bit more, I guess you could say, fleshed out and given a little bit more detail and a little bit more of of structure than this, actually. And I'm not saying that I'm disappointed in this, but it really didn't make me want to read the other books. Like, I honestly do not want to read all of the other books that C.S. Lewis wrote with this whole fictitious world. And then I think having a lion as your hero, and and then the rest are human characters, and it just feels very bizarre to me. And then they make out this lion to be this pure thing, and uh, he has no faults, and it just feels so like that's what I really don't like about these very religious kinds of works sometimes, or like try to emphasize religious themes. They really do make good and evil. They don't give a whole lot of depth to it. And I think that was really a main issue that I had with this story and the whole kind of set, because this is really the book that is supposed to set up Narnia. This is really the story that's supposed to carry everything out. And to be honest, I don't really feel like there's a whole lot going on, and I didn't feel that there was a huge amount of depth to the characters even either. And again, this one kid, the younger boy, Edmund, I don't understand why he behaves the way he behaves, and it just doesn't make any real sense to me. And all the other kids don't behave in that same manner. It's just really bizarre. And it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense, and I kind of don't like it when they do try to go for the simplistic angle. And especially making the one kid be the bad kid instead of having all of the kids actually make some kind of mistakes and own up to those as well. I think it's just very, again, it's simplistic. It's not as in depth as I like these kinds of stories to be, unfortunately. And that's where it's just hard because I don't identify with really any of the characters. I didn't really get a huge amount of investment from the story, actually. I wasn't at the end of the day inspired. Even when I saw the movie, I mean, and the movie follows the book fairly closely. I mean, yeah, obviously there's little detail changes here and there, but for the majority, when you really look at the plot, it really follows the plot for the most part to T. And the characters the same way. I mean, it's just bland. It's just bland. And I think sometimes these religious or stories that focus on trying to have kind of like religious messages, for some reason, I think come out fairly bland. And this is one of them. But obviously there's ones that don't. But this is one of the ones that does. To me, at least. I'm not really a big C.S. Lewis fan. I'm sorry, I'm just not. I really do honestly prefer Tolkien's work, because I think he brings about a lot more interesting and very more in-depth concepts. And also I think as far as more children's oriented material goes, as far as fantasy, I felt like Harry Potter was a lot more in-depth and went through a lot of different stages of character development, rather than here, where I feel like really the only character that really changes at all is the one kid. And even then, he was sort of, I mean, a lot of the problems that they end up getting into is because of their naivete. And their willingness to trust people. So again, I think there's just some things that I think are just a little bit too they're just not as interesting to me. I mean, they're just not as thought out, I think, or as I mean, I think a lot of what C.S. Lewis is actually taking too, he's taking from these moral kinds of messages and just inserting them in this kind of fantasy-oriented plot. Um, and in doing so, it doesn't really make it all that original. You know, Narnia is definitely no Middle Earth. Not even close to the depth and the dedication. And I think you can just kind of just tell, like C.S. Lewis just kind of, I felt like he just sort of made this as a fun thing for kids and not really as something, you know, it's just not as, it's again the fact that it's just the world lacks depth and it lacks this kind of originality, I think is really what deters me from really enjoying anything that kind of really gets put in the table within this book. And yeah, the movies don't really do a service to the book as well. Well, because again, the book, even within itself, I don't think is that strong of a story. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me on this, and I'm totally fine with people saying, no, I think C.S. Lewis is the greatest author ever and greatest philosopher or whatever, because I guess he could claim himself as being a philosopher because he was a Christian writer. But to be honest, I don't find a lot of his work that interesting, and this really cemented my views and thoughts onto him. And really, when I look too at the, you know, even at the previews of the other Narnia films, I kind of feel like that the world, although it is kind of expanding, there's not a whole lot of anything that's all that interesting to me. I mean, it's so, again, it's just very bland. Like it's it's just not interesting. I don't find it inspiring. I just find it kind of useless, and I just can't get that invested into it. And I understand if there's more people who can get into this kind of work than me personally, but to be honest, I didn't really find it all that enjoyable, or all that, excuse me, interesting. I think, and I think largely, again, that has to do with the fact that, again, it's not that in-depth. It's not that, there's not a whole lot of complexity to it, and there's not a whole lot of originality or real creativity to it. And I think that's a really huge issue with fantasy, because I think with fantasy, you have to really dedicate yourself into the world of this place. And to me, Narnia just doesn't seem like an interesting place. It's not even like this is the only parts really that are really, like, this is the only map that you really get of Narnia. I mean, and even then, there's not a whole lot of description as to, you know, what's really there. You know, it just, again, it just feels half-baked. It doesn't feel like there was a real, genuine, creative effort. It was just kind of, here we go. Here's the world, Narnia. Let me just take this and just put it together, and yeah, we'll create a goat thing. Yeah, that's definitely what we've seen in other works. And oh yeah, we'll just take a witch and you know, have her be the villain, and you know, we'll have a lion as our hero, you know, and it's just kind of, yeah, I just don't think it's that good. I just don't. But I understand if there's others who feel differently than I do. I just think it's a little bit overrated for what it is. Is it well written? Yes. Is it well constructed? Yes. But I just don't think it's that interesting. I don't think it's one that I would really be revisiting. And this actually was a present, and I kind of feel bad because I didn't really enjoy it as much as I thought I would. because uh, because unfortunately, that's just sometimes how things work. And I read this back when I was a kid, and even then, I wasn't really that all intrigued by it. So again, I think it's just the way you choose to perceive it. But again, from what I can tell from my experience into reading it, I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of effort into it, and I didn't find it all that entertaining or engaging as a story. Um, but that's just my honest opinion. It's not horrible. It's definitely not bad at all by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't think it's that great. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this book. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.